Just reading over your consultation form right now. Some reactivity, anxious related, it seems.
Yes.
Okay.
Generally very friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Has always been a little anxious, but I'd say since the last year, what went from like we've dubbed like having like enemies on the block,
Mm-hmm.
like just dogs that she reacts to that we have literally never met.
Sure.
Where she'll start to amp and like she'll sniff them before we see them and just start to get like very like territorial with it. And what was like 1 or 2 dogs is now turned into, I don't know, like maybe 10 or 11.
Okay.
Where she starts just like, you know, hair goes up, she gets really rigid, like starts to just like get away from me sort of.
Gotcha.
But, you know, we just kind of, if we see these dogs or we can tell she's getting a little like anxious, like we'll try and cross the street or stop and wait for them like down the block.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And then like in our building, like now there's like a few dogs where like we were in the hallway at the same time, she starts to really like amp up. She's pretty reactive to like sounds in the hallways, but I mean, I know most dogs are. So yeah, that's kind of her. But yeah, for the I mean, other than that, like we've had her, she's 3. She's just fine the first couple years, always like a little skittish and anxious, and then like this sort of like more reactivity has been like more than the last year. I don't know if it's because we've been home all the time or stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah. Clover.
I'm sorry, how old is she?
She is 3.
She's 3, okay, so yeah, so it's from 2 to 3, she's gotten more anxious or like reactive, which makes sense because of, like you said, you guys are home more often, so she's probably more inclined to be defensive. Yeah. COVID changed a lot of things. You know, dogs with separation anxiety, didn't have separation anxiety, increased territorial behavior, people coming over, like a lot of people didn't have guests over for a period of time, so that became like a thing.
We had a friend
We
over
noticed-
it was like the first time in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And like she was usually always like fine with people coming over, and like she kind of, it took a long time to warm up.
Like he had to like leave, he had a helmet in his hand, like had him leave it in the hallway, and like she, again, was just sort of like, who is this? Like all of a sudden, like not freaking out, but like, yeah, much more like, what are you doing in my space? And then like he sat down and she just like was sniffing him a lot and calmed down. But yeah, was something that we had never seen prior to COVID.
Prior,
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Anything else?
Those are the big things.
Yeah, she like has never bitten. There was one time like in the winter when we were like playing in our building's parking lot in the snow, where like one of the dogs she doesn't get along with like came in, and so she was off leash and like charged and got on her, but just like barked a lot, and the dog ran away and then we grabbed her.
Gotcha.
So it's just sort of like been her. Most of the dogs I'd say that she gets really defensive with, it's weird, are littler.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean,
Like little yappy dogs, or
Yeah.
they just happen to be little?
They're smaller, but then like specifically when they bark, like
when they bark, she goes.
Yeah.
But then some, I mean, it's not just that. There are a couple ones that are more her size, where again, we never run into the people beyond like being across the street, and she's just like, "Who are you? What's going on? Like, get off my block," basically. Oh, and that's the other thing I should say. When we're like not on our block or in our building, could say hi to any dog, totally fine.
Oh, sure.
Like she freezes, like she wants to be greeted, because she's a little like some, but they'll come up to her and like people be like friendly, and we're like, yeah, and like then her tail just starts wagging and she just stands there. So it's like you get off the block, and it's like, okay, I can relax now when I'm walking around.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it sounds weird to us. I would say it is uncommon, for a dog to be territorial of the block, more so of the house or like the building type thing.
Which, right,
But
she
I've
is
come
back.
across a couple of cases over the years where it's like, once you're out of a certain range, the dogs are like, fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You would agree, right?
Yeah,
That's,
I mean, it's like our street and then the street over from us, like when we just like could take over on the block.
Sure.
But then like unless it's like she were to see one of those like dogs that she doesn't like, she's like totally fine. Like, she's fine.
Yeah, it's weird.
Okay.
It's weird.
Anything else?
That's it. That's a great girl. I don't think so, right?
She like in the house, she barks a lot at noises and like
In the alley and stuff.
Which I mentioned before.
Yes,
Yeah.
always been barked a little bit more in the last year, but again, I attribute all of it to just being around more.
Yeah.
Her being And just an
Or you guys are also around more, right? So you're probably noticing like, oh, like,
Yes, for all we know. Yes, for all we know. Yeah,
Sure.
You weren't teaching from home before that, were you? So,
yeah. Okay.
so yeah.
Anything else?
I don't think so. Right?
Um,
No.
I'm assuming before reaching out, you did some research on us or like read up on how we train or our methodology.
Yes, I reviewed the site and yeah, did some reading and some reviews.
Okay, so I'll kind of just break that down, educate you a bit more. So my primary tool of training is e-collar. It's it's e-collar for a few reasons. One, right off the bat, you get off-leash control. Okay, that's the biggest one. Two, it's very user-friendly in the sense that like it's a lot of common sense, it's a lot of logic. Because of COVID, I don't need to even touch the dog anymore. I just train you to train your dog. Because prior to COVID, I would show up, I would work with your dog in front of you to give you a visual. And then I would get the dog to you and then coach you through it, right? But the problem with that was that I would do like all the hard stuff. And that's where all the learning is. Right?
Sure.
So I've already trained God knows how many dogs now. I don't need more experience. So I'm teaching you from ground zero to train your dog. Okay, it's very simple, very easy to pick up the concepts, and then you just apply it to life. Okay, so all our obedience is meant to be functional as well. So I don't need to even touch the dog anymore. I just coach you through it, and then people are loving it because they're learning everything. They're learning all the hard stuff. Because once you leave the training, it's you and her, right? That's it. Plus, she ties it to you. So she's going, okay, like now there's rules, and now there's things that I can't do, and I have to listen, and it's all with you, okay? It doesn't require a lot of like, so there's kind of three primary forms of training, if you will. There's food only, which is positive reinforcement, the most common and like widely accepted way of training. Then there's like prong collar or gentle leader being the thing that goes over the nose. And then the prong collar is the spiky looking collar you might see on some dogs. Both very effective tools, but the problem is when you remove the leash, your dog now knows you don't have control. So now you cannot reinforce anything off the leash. Remote collar, on leash, off the leash, doesn't matter, we have a means of control, okay? So with prong or gentle leader, it requires a lot of technical skill. Kind of requires you to learn how to be a dog trainer in order to use these tools effectively. But also like if the dog is like too intense in their behavior and you try to correct them, if their intensity is like too far gone, you're not going to match them. And you need to be able to match and or override the intensity. That's where e-collar comes into play. So there's 127 levels that we can choose from in increments of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 127. So it really allows us to fine tune to the dog, the situation, the temperament, the stress levels. You know, are they being reactive? Are they anxious? Are they being territorial? Is it a soft dog? Is it a stubborn dog? All that stuff really doesn't matter. It's all at the press of a button. Okay, and I teach you all this stuff. So it has, and it's not like a lot of people call it like a shock collar. Shock is an incorrect term. Comes from a couple of places. One, old school e-collars had like 3 to 5 levels, whereas now we have 127, right? And 5 and 127 are the same, but we have 122 more divisions. So before, your dog would be yelping at 3, but not listening at 2, for example, so you're kind of stuck. Whereas now, 60, 40, 50, 51, 49, 54, I can really just kind of dial in to the situation. So they're much more refined now. Also, in the positive only realm, they don't believe or they don't accept using corrections, meaning like an aversive to deter behavior or motivated behavior, okay? So it's all positive only. So they use words like shock because it makes people think they're electrocuting their dog, which they're not, to deter them from using the tool. Does that make sense? So an e-collar, or at least a professional grade e-collar, is a miniaturized TENS unit. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Have you ever seen, have you ever been to a chiropractor or physical therapist where they put like the little nodes and then there's wires and it moves your muscles? Have you ever felt that before?
I've seen it.
You've seen it? Yeah. So if you've ever seen like those YouTube videos where they recreate labor contraction pains in men, it's the same technology. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
So that's different, right? Because it's the same technology, but labor contractions obviously are not fun.
Yeah.
They're very painful, they're very strong muscle contractions, right? Because you're pushing out a baby, getting ready to push out a baby. That's an e-collar, essentially, but that's like to a very high level. Okay, so they're not electrocuting those men, it's just a very strong contraction used with an electric current, but there's not electricity going through, okay? So that's an e-collar. So the higher we go up on the collar, of course, the more intense the contraction is. And we work at the level that's appropriate to the dog. And I help you find all that stuff out, because every dog is different, okay? Just like that every human is different. So I get some clients who've done TENS therapy, and they would be like on 1 to 2, and it was like too much for them because they're super sensitive. And there's other people that are like, yeah, I used to max that thing out because they didn't really do much. But they had just had a very high tolerance, okay? So I help you figure out what's her tolerance and what's gonna work appropriate to the situation, okay? So you're not electrocuting your dog, it's simply a muscle contraction. What makes it very effective is that dogs are physical animals. Dogs bite each other, okay? So like if she got out of line with another dog, that dog may nip and or bite her to tell her, do not do that to me. There's no conversation. There's no like, hey, please don't try to mount me. Please, you're barking too loud. These are the rules of the dog park. Like none of this stuff goes on. There could be a group of dogs and they've never met each other before. And if one gets out of line, you'll see the others just correct them. They don't tolerate bad behavior, so to speak, okay? So this here is a dog bite. This is a dog that didn't want to go in the kennel. That was it, okay? He had never been in the kennel in his life. He was here for a boarding train, and funny enough, I wasn't even trying to put him in the kennel. I was just trying to see if he would fit in it. Because I was like, do I need a bigger one? It was a great day. And he's like, yeah, I'm not going in there, bit my hand. Okay, so, and I don't hold it against him because I understand dogs.
Sure.
He was actually just left today for boarding. So, he's not aggressive. We've not had any issues with him ever since. He had just never been in a kennel before. So he was like, hey, I don't know what that is, but I don't want to go in there. And that was his way of telling me like, yeah, that's not gonna happen, okay? So dogs are physical animals. So the e-collar is physicality at the press of a button. So the pros of it are, we don't get confrontation. There's cons to that, but a lot of people aren't comfortable. Like if you use a prong collar, it's meant to mimic a dog bite. That's why it looks the way it looks. Is if you pop the leash, it's meant to create a biting motion, but a lot of people don't like the yanking part of it, or they don't have the physical strength to correct correctly or firmly enough, or they don't have the skill set to correct correctly. A lot of people tend to be always tense on their dog, and it keeps the contraction going all the time. The dog never learns what they're doing incorrectly, okay? So with remote collar, it's all at the press of a button. So I had a young lady who was probably like 90 or 100 pounds. She had a 150-pound Great Dane. He was dog reactive, and she lived in Bucktown. So the dog would drag her across the street. So she did prong collar with e-collar, because if she turned the corner and there was a dog, the prong collar allowed her immediate leverage, whereas the e-collar allowed her to shut down the reactivity because she didn't have the strength to correct them firmly enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
I get couples, like I had a gentleman who just did a board and train with his dog. He was like 78 years old with a dog reactive 100-pound German Shepherd. Okay, so I have to compensate for these things, and e-collar allows me to do so at the press of a button. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. The first thing that we always teach is the heel command, which is walking on a leash, and this is most likely what's going to help you resolve your reactivity issues. Okay, so one thing here would be harnesses actually promote or can escalate dog reactivity or leash reactivity. Okay, dogs have a thing called opposition reflex. Are you familiar with that?
No.
So just like if you hold them back, they want to go the other way.
They want to go against it, correct. When they feel pressure, they go against it. You pull back, they pull forward, you pull forward, they pull back, you pull out, they pull right, so on and so forth, okay? So what happens is it creates frustration. So this looks like to be like a front clip harness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are known as like no-pull harnesses, which isn't like an oxymoron because harnesses are meant for pulling. Huskies wear harnesses to pull sleds. Horses wear harnesses to pull carriages. So you don't see the driver trying to control the horse with the harness. They have the bridle and it controls the head, right? And that's where they can steer the horse. So same thing for dogs. When you put a harness on a dog, you're essentially just telling them to pull you, okay? And what the front clip harness does is that it diverts the pulling pressure to the side. So the dog doesn't have as much leverage. But a source of their power is their chest because they push with their back legs and pull forward with their front legs. So then all that power is going right there. So In protection training, where we train dogs to actively be aggressive towards humans and we want to control it, you put a harness on the dog. Okay, so we want nothing inhibiting the throat. We want nothing deterring the dog from becoming agitated. We have someone on the other side being suspicious, agitating the dog, pissing them off to escalate, barking and biting and all that. And the other person is pulling the dog back because the dog's like, let me at him, let me at him. So we're creating more frustration. And then we start to reward that frustration by letting the pressure go and allowing the dog to actually bite the agitator. Okay, so this is super common. I see it all the time. I get people who've got puppies. They're like, my dog was friendly as a puppy, loved everyone and everything. And then over the course of the first year, it just gradually became more aggressive. First thing I ask you is, were they on a harness? And they say yes. I'm like, yeah. Because every time your puppy saw a dog, you're pulling your puppy back and you're creating agitation. And then the puppy starts to associate it to every single dog that it sees. But the human is going, well, I don't want my puppy to get bit because my puppy's got bad manners. But then the puppy's going, man, every time I see a dog, I feel negative pressure. So it creates agitation, which ultimately can lead to aggressive behavior. The other thing it does is it amplifies emotions, if you will. Anxiety, fear, nervousness, aggression. It can double and or triple the dog's emotional state. So if a dog is very fearful and I pull back on them on a harness, you'll see that fear escalate. Okay, it's just natural response. It's just how they're made up in the sense of their like genetics. So all these things kind of pair together make for a bigger problem. So when we train, the reason why we teach the heel first, a number of reasons. One, leash pulling and leash reactivity are two of the most common things that people want to resolve. Heel is the answer to those issues. My style of heel is very strict. I take 5 steps, the dog takes 5 steps. I take 3 steps, the dog takes 3 steps. When I stop, the dog automatically sits. That's with a completely slack leash, and I don't care where we are. I don't care if you're in a PetSmart or Home Depot or Oz Park or the neighborhood. I want that level of focus. It sounds complicated, but it's super simple to teach. Okay, you just have to have the right methodology and the right tools to get it. Okay, when you have that level of focus, the way it helps with everything else is, one, if she's more worried about you, she's not worried about the dog that she's seeing on the street. Okay, because she's thinking, well, if I leave your leg, there's a physical consequence, right, that I can relate to. Whereas that dog across the street is just like something that bothers me. So this is going to mean more because it's concrete. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So then we always start with the heel first and teach the dog what to do. And then we see, what does this resolve? Heel fixes like 70 to 80% of problems, which is why it's also the first thing that we teach. So like barking inside the house, you might see that start to dip as well, because that's, it can be because of being home more consistently now. It can also just be frustration and heightened territorial behavior, which like, because it's just a neighbor, right? Or it's just a neighbor taking their dog out for a walk. She doesn't. Even though she's heard those sounds 100 times, in her mind it's like there's some kind of threat outside, okay? So she doesn't think like we do. So when the dog is heightened and in a stimulated state, you might see a higher rate of these behaviors. So when you start to do the healing exercise and discipline her and pacify her and calm her down, you may see less of those behaviors within the home. Okay, because now she's calmer. She's not as heightened and on alert as she was before. Okay, and people always ask like, why? And I go, because human discipline for a dog is no, clap, put them in the kennel, put them in a different room. And I've even seen people scold their dogs, and dogs don't speak English, so I'm not sure why that even happens. Dogs are physical, okay? And it happens all the time where I had a husky, and she was super vocal, like barking and whining all over the place, and they did like 10 minutes of e-collar work, and then at the end the dog was like this. And the owner's like, why, how did that happen? I said, because you're nipping and biting her. And that's what another dog would do. I understand that we love our dogs and we want to be nice to them and not be mean, but it's not about being mean. It's simply about giving them a consequence for something you don't want, but then also your energy about it. And e-collar takes away the energy, because that's what creates issues, is that people try to ignore things and then they get too frustrated and then they come in like shouting. That is actually what creates the problem, not the discipline, okay? So we see, what does the heel fix? I'm assuming the reactivity outside on a leash, that should be resolved. If it doesn't, it's okay, we have other answers. And then we see how does it impact her within the home. And you might find like, hey Jesse, like she's like 90% better outside on the walks now, and 70% better in the home. I go, great. Heal did a chunk of all that. Now we have to figure out how do we resolve that last 10 and 30%, okay? So the first 2 classes are always heal. In class 1, I teach you to teach her and give you your homework, you do your homework. You come back to class 2, what improvements have we seen? Where are we not seeing improvement? I'll ask a bunch of questions. You give me some information, we make a few tweaks, we teach the second half of heal, you come back the 3rd week, okay? Let's say she's still struggling with dogs barking at her. I go, not a problem, that's pretty common because that dog is putting threat on her. So in her mind, she's valid, but you can still stop the behavior. It's just that her response to those dogs is more important than the heal is. So then we go to what we call a direct approach. So we have indirect and direct. Indirect is we teach heal, what does it fix? Has nothing to really do with the behaviors, okay? Direct is she's still lunging and barking at a dog, we're gonna correct her for the behavior itself to deter it from happening, okay? So aversives are meant to stop things. If you run the red light right here in Western University, you'll get a ticket. I know that because I ran it, okay? So that has deterred me from running that red light right here in Western University. That's an aversive, right? But we have different types of aversives. We have emotional aversives, financial aversives, right? Whereas dogs, they don't. They're all about the physical aversive, okay? So the e-collar allows you to do that. Negatives can also be a motivator. So I was raised old school, I was spanked. So if my mom was like, Jesse, do the dishes or I'll spank you, I did the dishes. She was like, if you don't get straight A's, you get spanked. I'm like, all right, so I got straight A's, right? Because I wanted to avoid that aversive. So it can also motivate things. But dogs are a little bit different. Obviously, we can't explain these things to her. We have to shape everything using the pressure, okay? So e-collar can teach to do things, and it can teach not to do things, okay? So it's all about how to apply it. So the heal, we will be using the e-collar to teach her to walk correctly. That's a skill set. So that's why I have to teach you to teach her, and then you have to practice because she's not meant to walk on a leash at your side. She's not even meant to be in a harness with a collar and a leash on. She's meant to be a coyote or a wolf or a dingo, or whatever she was genetically, thousands of years ago. So all these things are not natural to dogs. We have to teach them. Behavior, however, is natural. So that doesn't really require us to teach something. So like, if I have a dog that we're in a training session and they blow up and they become super reactive and I need to shut that down, I technically don't have to wait 3 classes in to do that. I can do it within that moment. But I have to teach you how to do that, and that's why there's a little bit of a delay.
Got it.
Okay? So questions about this stuff so far?
Is the e-collar something that she has on all the, like in the house and while we're like walking her, or is it like only when we take her out?
It's when you need it.
Okay.
Right? So like, let's say within the home, we resolve a lot of the reactivity, but you want it to be better. I tend to not use the e-collar inside for stuff like that, because then you'll become dependent on it, okay? So then once the collar's on, she's gonna behave. When the collar's off, she's gonna bark at the door or whatever, okay? So I'll give you alternate means of corrections. When it comes to like, because one of the most common questions I get is like, when does the e-collar go away? And in my book, when you need it, it doesn't. The simple explanation for that is simply opportunistic behavior. Are you familiar with this? You guys drive?
Yep.
You go on the expressway?
Mm-hmm.
Do you go the speed limit?
No.
Right. Because unless you see a squad car, there's no real incentive to do so, right? If you see a squad car, what happens?
Slow down.
Yep. And you pass a squad car, what happens?
I guess it depends.
Well, most people would speed up, right?
Yeah, yes.
So that's opportunistic behavior. So even as humans, and we know better, right? We're aware of the laws and like going past 70 is not allowed and all that stuff. It's opportunistic behavior. If we know we can get away with it, we bend the rules a bit. So think of it that way. Think of the e-collar as a cop on a collar. Okay, so when she's got the collar on, she's going to be more well behaved. She understands there's sort of consequence. She's not going to be reactive and all that stuff because you have a means of consequence. But then as soon as you remove that, she's going to go, oh, well, that cop's not here. So I can pull on the leash and I can bark at this dog and I don't have to listen. So it has nothing to do with the methods or my skills as a trainer. or anything like that. It's simply just, that's just how the way the world is. And regardless of any methodology that you use, when you remove the motivator, whether good or bad, performance will always dip. So like, you guys work? Would you, if they stopped giving you a paycheck, would you keep working?
No.
Right? That's your motivator. You work and you get a check. Same thing here. So that's why if we do positive only, a lot of people complain like, well, just if I don't have the treat, the dog won't do it. But yeah, because there's no motivator. There's no payment there. And then if we apply the same thing to aversives, if we removed cops and laws and judges and jails and prisons and consequence, do you think people would still obey the laws?
Certain laws.
So
Wow.
that's just the way of the world.
Sure.
So for dogs, it's the same thing. It's nothing good or bad, it's just, it is what it is. But if you're doing your homework and you've done your homework, you're not having to always use it. It's simply there just in case. Okay, so like my guy's been off leash trained for 8 to 9 years, and they still would collars if I know they're gonna be off leash. Okay, because like my pit, for example, hates fireworks. And there was 2 times where I was walking along the boulevard here in Logan Square, and somebody randomly set off a firework, like in August and October of last year.
Sure.
That was completely not expected. Now I didn't happen to have my collars on because I wasn't planning on leaving my dogs off leash. I was just walking them. So then my pit got spooked and became very anxious because she's like, fireworks, I hate them. And I had no means of getting her back under control other than what I could do with my skills with the slip leash, because her anxiety was past what I could do physically. I needed the collar essentially to compensate for that, right? So those are things that we can't plan for. I've had people's dogs get charged by off-leash dogs. I've had people's dogs run away because of fireworks. I've had people's dogs come across coyote over in Lincoln Park. I've had people's dogs get into a dog fight over a ball when they've never been in a fight in their life. Like all these things that just like happened.
Sure.
But they were able to return their dog because of a remote collar. Okay, so it's kind of there just in case. If she's a great dog inside the house and the barking and all that stuff dips, you don't need it in the house. Let's say when a guest comes over and you know she's gonna get very territorial, you might have it on and we work on an exercise to teach you how to handle that situation. And then after 15 minutes, she's great and you move the collar, you don't need it anymore. Okay? So it only comes into play when there's typically when there's things that you cannot control, which is like outside stimuli. Otherwise, you know, you would have it on 24/7. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Other questions?
I guess, so just so I'm clear, like the 80% of it being heel, basically once like we sort of mastered that ideally, that should basically distract her from dogs that she's reacted to only because she's paying attention to us. Do I kind of have that? Right.
Kinda. So in the beginning, what you're gonna see is she's gonna be a bit more paranoid, so to speak,
Okay.
where you're gonna see a lot of this in the beginning, okay? But this is not realistic, right? She's not gonna stare at you all the time when you go for a walk.
Sure.
But in the beginning, because she's going, hey, there's a lot of consequence, because we're using the collar a lot more, you're gonna see that, a heightened awareness of you. But eventually she's gonna go, wait a minute, I don't have to stare at you the whole time. I just have to walk with my right shoulder to your left hip. As long as I'm in that position, I can actually look and observe and take in the environment. And as long as I don't become reactive, I won't get the e-collar. Is you'll start to see her opt for different things, but she's not going to entirely be focused on you 100%.
Okay.
Okay? So I don't want to create a robot. Okay? We don't create robots. But in the beginning, because there is so much more discipline, it's not uncommon to see that in the beginning. And then people think like, oh my God, my dog's never paid attention to me before. And like, now they're staring at me. I'm like, for now, but eventually it'll go away.
Got it.
Okay? So then what dictates the length of time and cost is simply how much you're trying to achieve. So I have 3, 6, 9, and 12-week programs. Think of the 3-week program as I just want to walk my dog. I want to walk my dog, I deal with reactivity, I don't want to deal with pulling, so on and so forth, okay? The 6-week is walk my dog, go to the park, meaning heel and recall or come when called. The 9-week is walk my dog, go to the dog park, go to restaurants. And 12-week is we do everything with our dog. We go hiking, we go to the dog beach, we go to friends' houses, you know, all that stuff. Then we do full, complete off-leash control with the 12-week program, okay? So it just depends on how much you want to accomplish with her. The 2 most important things the dog should know are the heel and the recall, okay? Walk on my side and don't pull, don't be reactive, and then come get your butt over here when I call you, okay? Everything else is really just personal preference. What would your life look like with her if like you could have what you wanted?
What do you mean?
Yeah, like, because some people, they're like, just, hey, I just want to walk my dog, because their ceiling is so low. because they're thinking that they're not going to get far, right? And then there's like, well, if you could have what you wanted, like, yeah, we would take her to restaurants if she wasn't reactive, or we would take her, you know, here off leash if we knew she wouldn't run away, type of stuff.
I think being able to walk her is one.
Mm-hmm.
Like being able,
I think recall would be good.
recall would be
Yeah,
good,
because
yes.
I would never take her. We've been to dog parks. I would never take her off leash somewhere where I know she wouldn't be fenced in. We would never see her again.
Right.
I mean, she'd be right there, and then if a dog sparked her interest, gone. So,
Being able to like interact with other dogs without me being like having to like worry, is she gonna go crazy if a dog?
yes,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I need to like hike with. That might be a bit much, but like, yeah, I would like to feel like I'm not stressed when I'm out with her, like walking, and like, yeah, just being able to, yeah, I don't know, play fetch, keep her in an area where I feel like I have control, I guess.
Okay. Anything else?
Like going to dog parks, I wouldn't mind going to like taking her to a restaurant, but like that's probably as
Adventurous.
yeah.
Yeah. I guess it'd be great if she also behaved for other people. I mean, just.
Also,
Just when like, you know, I have a friend watch her, just so I, with like friends watching her having to let her out or stay at my parents' house or something like that, just that I would not have to worry about having to tell them to be like, okay, she's,
Reactive around other dogs
Yeah,
across
sure.
the street.
yeah,
yeah. I
stuff
got
like
you.
that, yes.
Okay. So, going to the part where you said like, her saying hi to dogs and not having to worry about it, she can go crazy, right? Is this within that 1 to 2 block part that we're thinking of, or is this like anywhere on the walk where that may happen?
So like we used to take her to the dog park all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and when she started being more reactive to dogs, we stopped taking her to the dog park because we didn't know, like if she like we would never want her to act that way
Mm-hmm.
because we had seen that. So like just being more comfortable with her around other dogs.
Yeah.
And like it's really only happened in like the 1 to 2 block radius
Uh-huh.
of our house. Like it's never happened at a dog park. It did happen when like we were out of town and
we boarded her once.
we boarded her at like she goes to daycare, so like at that house, and I think because she was there for so long, then got protective of that house and actually
Oh, sure.
like kind of like I
You
think
got into
like,
a
had,
scuffle.
like had an incident. with
Yes.
another dog.
Which they were like flabbergasted by because they'd had her for over a year or longer, and it was like, oh, she was never like her temperament. But,
Sure.
so yeah, I think that sounds about right. I think that sums it up.
Yeah.
And when you say like you stopped going to dog park because she was being reactive, we're talking about on leash reactive, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So not uncommon that dogs will be reactive on leash, but completely friendly off leash. Okay.
Without like a few like the exception of like in the parking lot when we were like she was playing with a dog that she did get along with,
Mm-hmm.
and that dog like there was a dog in her building that she
Mhm.
doesn't like that she attacked.
Mm.
That was off
and
leash.
then also like
She was off leash.
Clover
Yes.
was off leash.
Okay. Gotcha.
And still charged the dog. Yes.
I mean
so
it-
that was
it-
a dog she didn't like though.
yeah, so it was like a
Yes,
dog
it
that
was
we
a
knew.
specific, yes.
Yeah.
She's never, to your original point, running into other dogs outside of our block that we've never met before.
Mhm.
She basically stands there and just wags her tail and waits to be greeted.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never think anything of it until within the last few months where I'm like, maybe she gets spooked by a firework because she hates fireworks too, or a loud noise, and she's like
Mm-hmm.
amped up, I guess.
And then like when she was
Which was
ordered
boarded.
her at
The incident was off leash.
Yeah, that incident was off leash.
Sure. Yeah. When it comes to like daycare stuff, so when a dog becomes aggressive, I think it's interesting. I like think of like aggression as like a heightened form of anger, if you will, right? Like anyone and anything is like capable of becoming aggressive.
Sure.
It's just whether or not are you put in the context that you feel the need to do so, right? So dogs, since they're more primitive, are more inclined to escalate to aggression. Because as humans, we're self-aware, we're aware of laws, we're taught, not to become confrontational and things like that. So we tend to have apprehension, whereas dogs don't really have that apprehension. So regardless of because of COVID or you know, there was a dog that, even though she was off leash, it was like a nemesis dog, right? Or even like at a daycare kind of setting, it's like, you know, shit happens sometimes,
Yeah.
you know? So I always think with a grain of salt whenever somebody tells me something about their dog becoming aggressive at daycare. Because a lot of times daycares don't know what they're doing.
Sure.
I have a lot of dogs here from other daycares that got kicked out because they were bad dogs, and they do completely fine here. But we don't let dogs just go crazy all the time. Like, it's very structured. We do small 8 to 12 dog groups as opposed to like 30 to 70 dog groups and like other places. That's just like way too much. So there's a lot of factors that go in there. I think you also saying like she got territorial. That's also a possibility.
Yeah.
Where she got so comfortable with the place. I'd have to know more about the context of the incident to kind of get a better
Sure.
idea.
And to defend her, or Clover, the dog that she like mounted or like tried to scare off our parking lot in the building, she had met the dog before, and the dog had like, they had like little like bark, like it was not like totally, I mean, she became an enemy, to use the term, because of like the dog was like more of a smaller like yapper dog, and I could tell like that heightened her. So that's sort of how like we got to that point, I guess.
Sure.
So
Yeah, all that stuff factors in.
sure.
You know, because I mean, she's not like you guys, where you can think more complexly, and you're just like, that's just our neighbor's little annoying happy dog.
Sure.
You know, she's just like, because dogs don't really see size, they see energy. So if the dog could be a 5-pound dog barking at her, she's like, oh, you're putting out threat. Like,
Yeah.
whereas you're like, you would kill that dog in one little chomp, right?
Yes.
She doesn't think that way. So all that stuff I don't hold against her. I'm like, I get it.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, so like, cause like, I think you said there was a point where she did pin down a dog and she's like barking at them or something.
Yes.
Yeah. So if there was intent to do harm, it would have been done.
Yeah.
You know, like dogs will go there. So that's also another thing that I factor in as well.
Okay.
So I feel like you guys are like in that 6 class range. It would be 2 on heel, 2 on recall, which leaves 2 as a variable. Those 2 could either be like, hey, you know, we're still struggling with like barking in the house. We can cover that. Or it could be, if you wanted to work on socialization, I can teach you how to socialize her correctly. I wouldn't worry about socializing with dogs you see in the street, okay? Unless you feel completely safe with it. The reason why I say this is, there's this kind of unrealistic ideology around dogs where like they should love everyone and everything that they meet. And that's not true. Some dogs can, yes, some dogs don't. And some dogs are just a little bit more selective. So for people, I always ask them, like, if you go to Trader Joe's, how many people do you talk to?
The cashier.
Yeah, maybe the cashier, right? And maybe an employee to ask, like, hey, where's the chicken, right? But we don't say hello and like shake everybody's hand, but we're still social, right? And that's what I expect from my dogs. I don't need her to say hello to everybody. We just need her to walk past dogs and not be a jerk,
Yeah.
okay?
Yes.
Now, if you would like to socialize her with friends' dogs, family dogs, or dogs that she would see on a repeated basis, yes, that's perfectly doable because that's a dog she would see over and over again. But there's a correct way to do so. So for humans, we greet face to face, hi, how are you, and shake hands. Dogs greet nose to butt. So when they greet on a leash, a lot of times they greet face to face, which is confrontational. And that's why a lot of times that sparks something. And I've seen and I've heard people on the street go like, oh, is your dog friendly? Yeah, my dog's friendly. And they go to socialize and there's a scuffle, right? Because of the way they greeted. It was too confrontational. So even though they're social dogs, the setup made it negative for them, but they decided to like get into a fight. But I wouldn't worry about the dogs on leash unless you feel fine with it. You know, I always go by how the owner feels. Because the other thing is, your capacity for reading dog behavior and mine are very much far apart, right? Because I've trained
What makes you say?
at least over 1,000 dogs in 10 years, you know, and I do this every day, all day. I can see as many as 8 to 10 dogs a day.
Sure.
So, you know, obviously I'm having a much more refined eye for it, whereas you may not. And we only have a small window within an hour for me to teach you about that stuff. So I wouldn't worry about that so much. But if you want to work on socialization correctly, more than able to do that within that 6-week program, pending everything's going well, okay? I don't see why it wouldn't, but there's always a chance that it can't, okay? So it's pretty straightforward. I can only take you as far as you're willing to go. So like, let's say Clover.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say Clover, for whatever reason, happens to be very intense on like, in terms of resisting the collar. Like she's very physically tough. Your number could be 95, right? And if you're not willing to go to 95 to get Clover to be compliant, well, we're not gonna get anywhere, okay? And I don't know what her number's gonna be. I hope you find it. But I bring that up because that's something that people don't, a lot of people aren't comfortable with because they're logical. So if we're going, and we always start low, we start about 15, because that's where most dogs feel it, we work our way up. And I keep going up until I get a response from Clover, and I'm looking for a very specific response. And I'm like, oh, it's 95. And for me, it's nothing. And for you, you're like, that's 95 out of 120 levels. Like, that's like 30, that's 3/4 of the power, right? Like, you just start thinking all these things. I'm like, yeah, but she doesn't listen to anything else lower than 90. You know, but it's the logic and the emotional component that kind of kick in for the human, and then they have to kind of work themselves around it. And I'm not trying to hurt your dog, but I'm trying to fix the problem.
Sure.
You know, so growing up, if my mom whooped me for something like twice, and I did it again, she's like, well, I whooped you twice for it, so that didn't work. I'm gonna whoop you 8 times to see what happens, right? Okay, didn't do that again. It's kind of similar for the dog. You need to match her intensity, or you need to match the behavior. Every dog is different. It could be the most mundane thing, and the dog would need 127. To give you an example, had an Australian Shepherd that I trained. He used to love digging in the garbage. And they would do 127 continuous, which is the harshest correction you can give to a dog, okay? And he would still go in the garbage. And they're like, Jesse, we're 127 continuously in the dog. He's still going in the garbage. And I said, are you doing this when he's in the garbage? And they said, yes. I said, we're gonna change that up. I'm gonna have you do 127 for even looking at the garbage. We're gonna see what happens. Then we start to see him decline the behavior because he couldn't get into the garbage. For him, it was worth 5 seconds in the garbage, 3 seconds, 2 seconds was worth 127 continuous. And I felt 127 continuous. It sucks, okay? But he kept going back. And to them, logically, they're like, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, to you as a human. But for him as a dog, makes complete sense, you know? So these are the variables that come up. I help you find them and figure them out. But if, you know, they were obviously willing to go there to fix the problem.
Sure.
But if they weren't, I would have just told them, well, then you're just gonna have to deal with the fact your dog's gonna dig in the garbage. Because if you're not willing to match him or override him, he's gonna keep doing it, okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But we always start low, we work our way up. It's the same thing they do with humans. They're trying to find your sensitivity level. They start low and then work their way up. So we do the same thing here. And her behavioral number versus her obedience number could be vastly different. Her obedience number could be 25, and she's great on the recall, she's great on the heel and stuff, but then when she sees the dog, you might be at 65. And that's the thing about remote collars, is very adaptable. You know, is she playing with dogs in the dog park? Is she running away from firework? Is she, running towards the street? Is she just walking in a quiet neighborhood? And it's logical, so you just kind of go up and down as needed. But it's pretty straightforward, in my opinion. Okay? Other questions?
You said that we're not using like a prong collar, but you wouldn't recommend a harness. What, you just like a normal collar then?
Yeah, just a flat collar with a remote collar. Every now and then I'll incorporate prong. If the human needs a little bit more leverage, like the young lady I mentioned earlier, because she was 90 pounds to 150 pound Great Dane. In most cases, a flat collar with your remote collar works just fine. Because I do everything to the collar, okay? Because when we practice, the more you use your leash, the more reliant you become on it. So then, or become to it. I think I phrased that wrong, I'm tired. But let's say you're so used to using the leash, and then you take the leash off, and then something happens, your first instinct is gonna be the leash, or grabbing her. Whereas my first instinct is jump to the collar. So I try to wean this out as early as possible because everything's put to a press of a button. Okay, so I'm not only conditioning her to be responsive to the collar, I'm conditioning you to become reliant on it. So if something should happen, you're jumping to that tool as opposed to trying to grab your dog. Okay, so like I had a client whose dog got in a dog fight at House Park. Her dog and another dog went after a tennis ball at the same time and just sparked a fight, and then she just jacked up the collar, 127, and pulled her dog out within a split second. And then, she was like, hey Jesse, was this correct? She's like, I didn't know. She's like, I didn't want to go in there and pull her out. I was like, no, you would have gotten bit. I was like, you were correct. You jumped straight to the collar and pulled your dog out within a half second. Like, that's correct. Otherwise, you could have gotten hurt. You could have made the fight worse, because when you separate dogs when they're fighting, it tends to intensify the fight. Somebody just mentioned to me the other day where a dog had bit down the on the dachshund, and when they pulled the dog off, it ripped that dog's back off. I'm like, that's the stuff that people don't think about. But that's something that I always say. I'm like, if your dog is latched on and you pull them, they're gonna tear through tissue and muscle. But that's our first instinct.
Yeah.
You know, my first instinct is if I have the collar, jump to the collar. Okay? So there's a lot of factors here that kind of come into play, but it's all stuff that we would cover within the 6 classes. Other questions?
I guess it's more tactical, but how easy is it to jump between like collar settings? Would we eventually just be at a place where we know her dog reactivity is like 80, so you just set it before you walk her to that? And
Right.
Okay.
You be preemptive.
Yep. Okay.
Now, more often than not, it's pretty straightforward, right? But like every now and then I get a case that's a little bit more difficult where I'll tell them like, if you're gonna turn the corner, just assume you're gonna see a dog. And then, like you said, go to 80. Or they may see the dog a block away, I'm like, just assume you're gonna see reactivity, 80. So because once the dog goes up, trying to go to that range and control your dog at the same time is difficult. Yeah.
Okay.
And then they'll get to a point where they're like, yeah, we haven't seen reactivity in like a month. Then they can just they know. The other thing is, since it's a streamlined system, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 again, all the way to 127. It's just a muscle contraction. So like, if you see me work with the dog, I won't be looking at the numbers myself. I might do it for the client, and I'll shout out numbers for the client's reference. But for me, the dog tells me everything. So if I'm tapping and bumping, and the dog's lunging and barking, wherever I'm at the moment, clearly it's not enough. And then finally I'll hit a number and I'll tap, and the dog will jump back and stop, and then I'll look and I'll go 99. Okay? Because it's just a muscle contraction. I'm not worried about killing the dog. The dog's not gonna get punctures and start bleeding. So, other questions?
Do you have questions?
I don't think so.
6 weeks. Where is that?
We train at Oz Park.
Okay.
Yeah, so with COVID, before COVID, I used to do home to home.
Okay.
But then COVID happened and everybody was like, don't come into my home. So I was like, all right, well, I was like, I still gotta run a business. So then
The Lincoln Park one?
Yep. I was like, I know I can train dogs without having to touch them. I just needed someone to, because nobody believed it. We would get calls and they're like, no, like, if you're not gonna touch the dog, this and that. And like, it was weird because they wanted training and I was fine with touching the dog, but they're like, but I don't want you to touch my dog. And then I was just like, well, I can verbally instruct you, well, how's it gonna work if I touch my dog? I'm like, you're not giving me anything to work with right now. So we finally got our first client, and it's funny because they had signed up pre-COVID. They were due to start on a Sunday, and the Friday before, the governor had issued the stay-at-home thing or whatever.
Sure.
So then everything just got shut down. So they were actually the first post-COVID client, and they started a month later. This dog broke the husband's shoulder 2 times in 2 years and sent him to the ER 3 times, okay? Perfectly friendly dog, just pulled a crazy ton, okay? 90-pound dog. So they were like, we want to do something, we need to do something. I said, sure. I was like, we'll experiment. If it doesn't work, we won't charge you for the class or whatever. But they did it. And they're like, this is amazing, that we love it this way because we're learning everything. And she did a testimonial, and then once her testimonial went up, everybody started booking because they're like, oh, like this shit works. So we picked Oz Park because Oz Park is a very busy park, and I've come to learn that Oz Park is actually the busiest park in Chicago. Okay, especially on the weekends, it's crazy. Dogs, people, strollers, rollerbladers, bar mitzvah parties, jazz bands, and all the works is going on there. That's where we train. And then you get the results there. Okay, so if she starts to become reactive, I'm teaching you within the moment, okay, this is how we're gonna handle it, this is what you're gonna do, okay? And people love it. So other than in the winter time or like inclement weather when it's raining and stuff, I have a 13,000 square foot facility. My training floor is like 5,000 to 6,000 square feet. So we have plenty of space to do like the healing exercise and recall stuff and all that. And when it comes to distractions, it actually doesn't matter because people would always comment on that. So summertime, fall a lot, we train at Oz. Wintertime, they can train here.
Okay.
But the only thing that changes is the number. I'm like, if we're here, your dog's number is 25 because it's a controlled environment. Well, when you go outside, logic says your number will just be higher. So I teach you how to find that number, so then the training still transfers. You just have to find what's the number for my particular environment. Okay? But otherwise, we're moving back to Oz Park for our training for the summer. Other questions?
I think so.
When would training start?
So right now, I believe Maria said that we're booking into July. Okay? So she would be better suited to kind of give you information on when my next availability is. It depends on your schedule. You know, if you have daytime availability, I believe it's easier to get in because most people they're now back to 9 to 5 jobs. So my busiest times are evenings and weekends.
Or we're both going. It's not just gonna be one of us.
I just miss work. He does say he's been on summer break because he's a teacher.
Gotcha. Evenings and weekends tend to be my busiest, okay? So what would happen is you would give her your availability. She would cross-reference with my calendar.